Good morning and welcome to part one of our creating documentation workshop. So we'll have 90 minutes today and then 90 minutes in August, by which time I hope that um, some of you may have examples that you've worked on and we'll be able to kind of brainstorm and workshop on those. So today, we're going to do an overview of what the different types of documentation are, which I think is a helpful framework for planning your documentation. We're going to talk about some of the software. So I have a list of those softwares and we'll kind of just go into them live so you can see what's up with them. Most of them are free. I think I kept the list free. And then I've got the cycle of documentation creation and revision. And then on August 6th, we'll talk about some of the pitfalls that can happen when you're trying to create documentation. And then we'll have plenty of time to workshop anything that you want to bring to the group. So there's kind of two biggest classifications of documentation. And it's really good to think about what you're creating your documentation for, because it can determine a lot of other decisions down the road. So internal documentation is really for your organization, and it's things that you keep and use to inform decisions. So that can be like schedule preferences, important policies. External are the things that get shown to our patrons. They get shown to other college departments. It might be like advertising or promotional materials. Uh, so knowing whether you are creating internal or external documentation can help you a lot to think about what needs to be included in it. So internal documentation kind of has three sub types, and those are things for your team. So they are just, like a record of what you do or what's going on. There are reference documentation, and those are probably the ones you're most likely thinking like that you need more of. And so those can include, how to change a TOU, how to update the calendar in circulation, um, or even things like onboarding checklists for student employees. And then there's project documentation, and this is the stuff that MBAs love, and administrators. Project proposals and budgets and roadmaps and timelines and deliverables. Uh, and those are important to because they can also provide a historical record. So when you go back and you want to do another project, so sometimes even if you don't have all of the project documentation that a project manager might be looking for, there's still things you might want to document from a project. External documentation, it includes instructions and manuals. So when you think about, creating like a presentation for a library one shot on how to search for EBSCO. It's the policies and rules that you share out with the community. So how to schedule library instruction, how to place a hold, whether or not there's, food allowed in the library. And then signage is one that I think often gets overlooked, but it's the most obvious and most often poorly done external documentation, because oftentimes we take for granted that um, our users will understand our signage because we haven't thought about um, why we have the signage or what it's truly trying to accomplish. So now there are some different formats, and these are my own-ish definitions of the different types of formats for either internal or external documentation. Quick reference are ones that tend to kind of go by the uh, PowerPoint slide rule, like 6 words, 6 bullet points. You want things to be very visual. If you're looking at a checklist that's going to get, reused multiple times, is it erasable? Is it electronic? Can you print multiple copies of it easily? So quick reference is something usually for something that's done repeatedly, and usually by multiple people. And so having a standard reference document is important, and then having it somewhere that is useful is also important. Continuity documentation is usually the biggest, bulkiest, longest. So policy, full policies, full manuals, um, staff manuals, instruction booklets. Basically, if Ex Libris knowledge base was more user friendly, it could be considered continuity documentation. And then finally, and this one might surprise you, but interactive documentation. So creating a log for something, say a reference interaction, that creating a useful form is the same kind of process as creating a policy when it comes to treating it as documentation. So it captures data about your operations. So that can be recording electronic resource management. It could be like participation counts is what we used to call them in the pool, but like population counts. So where people sit at certain times of the day in the library to know, like, where do students like to study. Those can be, logs that are filled out by internal folks. So you might have a circulation student doing it, or they can also be forms that you send out to your users to determine some kind of uh, question that you want answered. So these are probably interactive. Documentation is probably the one that people don't necessarily think of right off the bat. But if you have a really good form, you get better data. Um, so um, we want to make sure with these 3 types of kind of forms of documentation that you are explaining to people how to use it, the documentation. You're also explaining how to do the work of your library. Process documentation, which could be either quick reference or continuity, is going to be detailed and step by step. You want to present it in as many variety of forms. You might want to try out a couple between like a checklist or a flow chart to see what works. But essentially, this is my belief, if there's something that's happening in your building, whether that is repeatedly or like once a year, if it needs to be done the same way or to the same standard every time, or like what the measure of completion is a standard, then documentation is critical to more effective, more efficient, and for evaluation of uh, those people doing the work. So, um, and the best part is it really inspires conversation on your team a lot of time. So, what makes good documentation? And these are very general because you can look at a piece of documentation and say, well, it has these three things and it still isn't great. But so there's some subjectivity to this. So, what order does it need to be in? Are you going to provide the entire process in one document? Are you breaking it apart? Do you need to provide historical context in a quick reference guide? Probably not. Should there be section headers for something like how to renew a book? Probably not. So knowing how much detail um, to put into your organization, as well as, what order things go in. Um, Second thing is clarity, and this is one that I think we all have heard. Librarians tend to be guilty of some jargon using. Um, and so that's one of the things that we need to be really careful about with external documentation. Circulation may or may not be a word that users understand. I will never forget the fight I had with changing reference desk and circ desk to research help and information desk. Um, because, like, well, but that's not what it is. Mm, Well, is it not what it is though? What does your intended audience call the things that you are trying to document? Now, being precise and accurate with the terms for what something is not using jargon. So if the button says submit, we still want to make sure we're saying submit so that the clarity is there. And then finally, consistency. Um, so keeping the general style of your documentation the same. Uh, and this can be especially helpful for like student workers. If they know how to recognize what a how-to document should look like for them, and they see that, then they can follow it more easily than if every single document looks different and the signs are in different fonts and they're in different colors, or they're just scattered all over the place. So consistency can also include keeping things in a consistent location, be that a file on a computer or a folder on a desk. Um, Having all of the signage in your building at eye level, having all of it at like front of desk level, whatever it is. Creating that consistency helps your user know what to expect. Um, so, how do we do all of this? So, I'm going to go ahead and, I mean, you probably all know your Microsoft Office products and your Google Docs, but we can take a look at Canva, Evernote, Confluence, and Bit AI, so you can get an idea of what some of those options are. Uh, you all may also know that I use ClickUp um, for some of my documentation. Uh, so I'm just opening up these different ones. Uh, and Okay, and reshare. So here is Canva. Actually, I made the slides in Canva. And what I really love and have come to appreciate about Canva is that there are more and more free templates for things. And it gives you uh, the ability to save like a style that's going to be consistent. So if you know that you want to create a mm, a checklist and it's going to be a weekly checklist, um, this is very colorful and very fun, but it gives you um, an idea of how you might be able to create something for the user that makes sense. So, you know, just by looking at this, you could recreate this in Excel. You don't have to necessarily, like I have Pro, so I could use this, but um, you can look at this and be like, okay, here are the daily tasks, here's the checklist for the days, here's the different areas, here's the items, super clear. Um, then you create it in Excel, you have your font or your colors, your sizing all locked in, and then the next time you want to create a checklist, copy that document so all of those consistent elements are there and the user knows what to look for. Um, and then you just change out the content. Um, so I really like Canva for kind of getting inspired, for seeing how different users might um, approach a task. So here's a house cleaning checklist um, that looks very different from that other one, but it's still organized by area. We've still got check marks. This one is kind of like go through it one time. The one we looked at before was, um, every week you'd print a new one, make sure that um, the tasks that need to happen weekly are happening weekly. So, free Canva is great. Lots of fonts are included, a fair amount of visuals, the good basics like check boxes and arrows. So that's great. Um, Evernote is what's it? It's kind of like it's the board note organization. So I don't even is there free? Okay, yeah. So there is a free option. So you can create 50 notes in one notebook. Um, and you can and this might be a way to brainstorm potential documentation. You can start adding notes or images, and you can export or add, search for content that you want to add, get it in one place. So that's Evernote. Confluence also has a free option, and oh, I used to have I think I just never used it and it died. But this one's a little more complex. It wants to push you to use paid services a little bit more. When I compared Confluence to ClickUp, I went with ClickUp because I felt like it was just easier. But like it has kind of some built-in infrastructure. So if you want to, create a knowledge base, many libraries have Confluence knowledge bases, especially the consortiums where I borrow a lot of documentation from. So this can be a great one. I'm not sure how useful the free version will become if it becomes a long-term solution. So that's something to think about. And then Bit AI, very similar to Confluence. I haven't even checked out the 3.0, but it might be worth it to explore how the AI writer can help you create, like consistent voice. So you could take something you've written and say, like, make this all more conversational, something like that. So, and then ClickUp, I can open up what I've got and share. So ClickUp's cool. You can create task lists, and come on. There we go. You can create very basic task lists with different views. So it helps when you're categorizing things. You can attach documents, you can attach pictures. It's free to connect it to emails. So you can create tasks from emails. You can choose your own statuses. Again, there's a lot of cool templates. So if you want to take a look at like, oh, I need to create, documentation of how our website is currently organized and how I would rather have it organized. Here's a template for that. You could also create this in like a Google Whiteboard. You could create it with sticky notes on an actual whiteboard. I've done that and then taken pictures of it. But these just get more and more robust. ClickUp, I don't pay for it, and I have all the functionality that I could want for managing what's going on and keeping records of things. So those are some of the options for the software. And now I'm going to go back to the presentation. So just give me a second. And make sure we're on the same. Yep, okay. Too many windows. Okay. This is really where I want to spend a good portion of the next hour. So I want to like take some example documentation or needs for documentation and work through these questions. So it's, I added some steps to kind of add detail, but the very first thing that you want to do whenever you're thinking about creating something, whether it's a new sign or a checklist or a full staff manual is figure out the scope. How much are you really trying to document? What are you, like what can you successfully get done? What actually fits together logically? Um, the worst thing you can do is um, try to do way too much with documentation, because one of the pitfalls is getting frustrated and like scope creep. So writing down the scope, knowing from the very beginning, I am going to document this one process. Um, and just keep it to that. Get as detailed as you need to. Um, if that process, you're only going to document the necessary steps within Alma. You're not even going to talk about how what other decisions have to be made before it can be changed in Alma. You're just going to do the instructions in Alma uh, so that you know exactly what it is that you are writing about. Then it's a lot easier to understand your audience. If you're not trying to do too much, then you should be able to figure out pretty quickly who is going to use this. Uh, so, is this for yourself? Is it possibly for a librarian who's going to take over your job? Is it for a part-time person who maybe every summer you get a part-time person, so they're going to have a learning curve every single summer? Um, that's a big part of it. Um, you certainly don't need to go so far as to make the uh, a user um, profile or anything and be like, oh, it's a middle-aged uh, well educated, but internal, external, an individual with knowledge, an individual who's unfamiliar with the content. Who is that audience? Identify players could also kind of be interpreted as who cares? Who are the people who have a say in this process? Also, who is affected by this process? Not all of those um, players will have input on it, um, but it's good to know um, how the documentation will affect people. Um, Now, sometimes we're not always sure of this when we start on something. And honestly, if you don't know who all is involved in this process, you might need to go back to define the scope. You can't create documentation for a process that you don't know anything about. Um, you need to find out who it is that has the knowledge um, and adjust the scope appropriately. Um, so the next thing is gather info. Another pitfall is spending too long gathering info. Uh, you'll never know everything there is to know about the process, but if you know that you have a notes document and like someone else's wiki that is your general outline for how you do it, make sure you have those two things um, as you get started. Next up is organize. This is where you can go back to looking at the people about who care um, and asking them uh, how they want it organized. Um, do they want to know at the beginning what action triggers this process? Or do they just need the process? Do they need the detail of sign into Alma admin? Um, are they going to want visuals with screenshots? Now, you're not necessarily going to get those screenshots just yet, But if you know that this is a process that will benefit from more graphic content, um, then organizing it might look more, um, it might look different than if it's all written words. Um, so you can sketch out an organization. I like to, so I was just doing the bylaws for Whack to Click, and so I had all the different articles, and we had one document with all of them, and it was a lot of scrolling, and there were a lot of comments. So I took the text and I moved it into three separate documents, three different sections, so it wasn't as long. And then I looked at the article headings, the section headings, um, and made an outline in a fourth document. So actually, it was a fifth document because I had the original bylaws that were commented on, three sections of bylaw content, and then rather than trying to bend my brain about around huge chunks of text, I typed up all of the headings and subheadings and was like, does this make sense? And I moved it around. And then uh, that made it a lot easier to work with the chunks of text. Um, now, steps 6 and 7, creating content, whether that's written or visual, is kind of dependent on how much content you have already. Sometimes adding visuals will require you to go through the process to capture a screenshot. And other times it just means finding the, little infographic that you need. So I also certainly if you are looking at writing longer content like a staff manual, things that include explanations of policies. Uh, if generative AI had been an option back when I was writing 100 plus pages of lifeguard manuals and student media manuals, I probably would have used generative AI to at least get um, some rough drafts worked together. Uh, so that gets you to having content in your document, hopefully understanding, who you're doing it for, why you're doing it. And now you can take what you've got to those people who care. So that might be informally to coworkers who would also be using the document, or it could be more formally with like a focus group of, hey, here's a new website homepage. What do you like? What don't you like? Uh, and then use the feedback. Unless this documentation is literally only for you and no one else is ever going to see it, um, you are trying to make it the best it can be for the people who are going to use it. So if they have feedback on this organization doesn't make sense, or I need another screenshot here, or that's not the word that I see on my screen at that point in the step, uh, you need to make those revisions. Otherwise, there's no point. Then you can reshare it. Any final kinds of corrections, feedback on any revisions that were made. And again, this can be formal or informal. And then finally, it's time to distribute it. And that in itself is a decision. Is this documentation that should have some kind of announcement so people are aware that it now exists? Do you need to make it very clear where this is going to be kept? So distributing is not just putting it in a file and forgetting that it exists. You want to make sure that it's getting to the people who can use it, and is in a place where they can use it. And then it's always good to just add a little something into your calendar, or maybe even at the bottom of the documentation of, we're going to look at this again in X amount of time. So if this is maybe a library one-shot plan, and you're like, here's the process to plan a library one-shot instruction session, you might want to revisit that as often as once a year, like depending on the number of faculty who are asking for it, or the number of librarians who are leading those. If this is something like how to check out a book at the circulation desk, you might only need to revisit if there are massive Elma updates. So you can put a note in the documentation itself of created X date, plan to revisit on X date, and then if you come back to it and it's after that revisit date, you know, like, oh, yeah, because number one thing I do, oh, I'll totally do that in 3 months. Oh, it's been 8 months. So put a date on it. I created a task in my calendar every single Monday this summer to check the registrations for these workshops. So coming back in to look at what you've created, just to make sure that your intended audience hasn't changed, the scope hasn't changed, make sure there's not more information or like changes to whatever it is, be that software or the space. Uh, Signs get left up in buildings way too long, and then you have, signs to a reference collection that doesn't exist anymore. So this is the cycle, and that is the content that I have today. And then I want to look at examples, and we can look at examples of stuff that I've done, so you can kind of see the decisions that I made, or if someone has a document that you'd like some feedback on from the rest of the group, we can also do that. So I will stop this share and just give you a minute to think about what you think might be most helpful as you consider these kind of elements of document creation. I'm gonna pause.
Something with documentation I've made. Sorry. Um, I've made documentation in OneNote that I've like lost access to because of like different versions of it. So like I'm like pretty careful about like what I like use for like documentation. I need like long term. Like I was like looking at all those different products and I was like, those are all very cool, but like
Well, and
I'm
honestly,
afraid.
yeah, and you may have noticed I do not have OneNote on there. I kind of hate OneNote um, because there's no like default like dating system. There's no inherent infrastructure. You can kind of just do whatever you want and things get lost very quickly. You can't cross search in your different areas. Um, I, like Google Drive is pretty good, but there's always the chance that you'll lose access to things. Um, One of the things that I've recommended for uh, people who've asked about, like, well, what about retaining this or retaining that? If the documentation needs to be, uh, I don't want to say confidential, but like needs to be held by a single individual, I recommend printing it out as well as keeping it electronically in, like some account. So like, okay, you've got, you know, the direction, for example, so uh, archives, what's it called? Not DSpace, bpress. So we had, yeah, printing out is also very helpful when systems go down. Um, we had a librarian who was in charge of our bpress instance, and she had all of the information about how she was uh, creating the organization in the collections, the process for uploading, how she was tagging, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and then the pandemic hit. We were all sent home. We did not have very easy access to our physical computers in the building where those records were saved. And then she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and passed away 2 months later and had like didn't come back to the office. And we were left piecing things together and trying to access, uh like she had the AWS account, she had the Gmail account. Now, this is not her fault. She literally laid on her deathbed writing out passwords and account names, which nobody should have to do that. Um, but if we had had more continuity planning as far as how to access different individuals' records, it wouldn't have been a problem. Um, so I very much appreciate that most of the Whack to Click records are on a Google Drive that are associated with a general Gmail account and not like my specific email. They weren't associated with Wade's specific email. I can give other people admin uh, permissions to files, um, and then I back up the access to the Gmail account with a shared drive file with all the passwords that's shared with Tim so that he has that. Um, and, unless Tim and I are together and get hit by a bus, hopefully, we maintain access to that stuff. Um, but yeah, OneDrive doesn't it doesn't migrate very well. Um, I've been using Google Drive a decade plus, and I think, like most people's experience is that as it adds more document types, things, stay. You don't really have too much of a problem with that continuity. Uh, with Canva, uh, even if you go from a paid account to a free account, you can still access the documents. You just may not have the ability to um, edit them if they included pro elements or were in a pro template. Um, I think, um, you know, putting things into a third party platform like Confluence can be very useful if you are talking about teamwork that's not a single institution. That's why so many library consortiums use it. However, it's probably overkill for a single library on a single campus. Um, if, like just share documentation. If it's on a shared drive, like a physical server in your university, and you have it on your website, even if it's a private site. Like if you have LibGuides, you can have a private guide, you can put documentation there. That's another great way to control access but also like not have it be dependent on a single person. Um, so yeah, choosing how you store your documentation is very important. And the last time I gave this workshop, it was one of like the top questions. Um, and one of the things with cyber incidents is having things printed out or having things on a Google Drive that is not attached to um, the college Microsoft account can be the difference. Um, and if your college doesn't like Google, that is why LibGuides is great because again, you can have a private guide. Um, um, yeah, teams having different channels. I have like come across different teams situations where someone has forgotten uh, that the channel existed or the infrastructure existed the way it did, and folders got recreated, and you know, someone didn't realize that a different team was doing the work, and so the same types of documents were getting saved in totally different places, like the continuation of meeting minutes of an academic committee went from getting saved under the provost to getting saved under, like faculty activities or something stupid, because probably there was no documentation about where we saved those minutes. Um, and, new secretary was like, oh, I'll just put them here. Um, so, um, yeah, very badly. Sorry about that. Redundancy is good. However, um, when I say redundancy, I usually mean multiple access points or access held by multiple people. Making copies of the exact same documentation and holding them in different places can become problematic because if changes are made to one version but not the other version, uh, then you get inconsistency. So, something else to consider. Um, trying to find, so I can show you some examples of documentation. Um, yeah, when people use Teams, it's great. I always worry with state contracts that they'll suddenly decide that they don't want Microsoft. I can't honestly imagine that would happen, but um, yeah, and saving things on platforms where the license allows AI harvesting of content. Um, you want to make sure that any FERPA data is not on there. So that's a whole other kit and caboodle. Um, so let's, so here is, so I have this list of various uh, various examples. So here's one that's actually library related. I am so proud of this. I made this as a page, granted at my like fourth library where it's a page, but they still use it like 11 years later. Um, so what I did was we'd had a shelf reading record that was very, very generic. It was like up here, it was like the section you read and the date and your initials. And the problem was there was um it was really hard for new pages to then say, well, I don't know where I should go shelf read, or I don't know like where to start or where to finish. And so people were double doing sections. No one was ever doing nonfiction because it's harder than fiction, whatever it was. So I went through the library and basically created these sections, and they must have updated these, at least I hope they did, because the library has moved and their entire shelf um, structure has changed. But each one of these was, I believe, 3 stacks. So 3 shelf sets. So like 15 shelves. Um, and um, some of them with like smaller books, so graphic lit wasn't quite that much. Um, and same with like magazines. But generally speaking, and I also base this on how much I could shelf read in 20 minutes, because we were supposed to do about 20 minutes of shelf reading a day. Um, and then by adding the date that you started and whether or not you got done with it. So, like, oh, I started new fiction, but I stopped at G because 16 people came in trying to use the same computer. Um, or you could just say, nope, completed the entire section and initials. It made it instantly clear to, and I was the only page at this library at the time, but it made it instantly clear to my supervisors what had gotten shelf read, um, and what hadn't. When had things last gotten shelf read? And so until all of this was shelf read, we didn't print out another one. I believe it got adapted for the downtown library because they have more pages. Um, and they basically split it apart so that areas that need to be shelf read more often, like J and E, um, were getting done, you know, more frequently than nonfiction. And their sections would have been smaller because they have more books. Um, but this makes it very easy for someone who may not be totally familiar with what like other pages are doing, or like how much is appropriate to be able to get done in a certain amount of time, uh, what is expected of them. So um, this was one I really liked. It's really simple, and it's an example of an interactive internal piece of documentation. Um, this was another one that I created. Iterated this one so many times. Um, so we had our um, opening and closing, and this worked for an entire week, um, which was great because then it was like, yep, every single day we have to do this thing. Um, but we don't have to do these things on these days. It made it very clear which days it was expected um, that those things be done. And then here was the closing, and you can see, like, oh, yep, we put in the vacuum on Monday and we take out the vacuum on Tuesday. Um, and then you just initialed. And I made it also for the daily one. So it split up the cleaning responsibilities between the different shifts because we did have set shifts. Um, lifeguarding is a very meticulous and regulatory heavy job. But I think that this is a great way to think about helping student workers understand the different jobs that they may be doing during different shifts. A closing shift might have more responsibilities around the building because there aren't as many people coming up to check things out at the desk. A midday shift where there's a lot of checkouts, well, that's a great time if the student is standing at the desk to add in wipe down the circulation desk. And then they can also see that Other students are doing work during their shifts. Um, and they're not just being like, well, I always do this thing. Well, yes, because that's what happens during your shift, but somebody else is always doing this other thing. So, you know, um, so I really like having these kinds of forms that are very visible and are the same all the time. So you just print out a new one every single week. I really like this for college age students. I think it adds accountability and it makes them like think, like, oh, it's fair. Um, Here was um, just a template for an evacuation first aid kit. So um, this could be something that you're like, oh, you know what? We need to make sure that we have a first aid kit at the circulation desk. And then you can, find lists online of what items should be in it, um, and figure out what container it's going to be in and what the reasonable number of items should be. And then you've just you've got an inventory, and from time to time, once a month, someone goes ahead and checks, like, yep, we still have 2 instant ice packs, or whatever it is. What's another? Here's some of my super, super long ones to give you an idea about organization and how it's important. So the consistency throughout this document, all of the headers were in sans serif, bold, for the most part, all caps. Um, this is the kind of stuff that I wish generative AI had been able to at least give me a draft of. Um, you have, you know, the contact information, right away, as this manual gets updated on a yearly basis, where the this needs to be updated is, so you don't have contact information spread all over the place uh, in some kind of continuity manual like this. Um, you've got um, various policies, explanations. I don't really love how much block of text there was in this, um, but I only like iterated this like twice. Um, but like we pulled policy from the institution policies so that it was all findable for the students in one manual, as opposed to being like, refer to this total other website that may or may not be up right now. So we had the different uh, technologies that we used. We had what email signatures needed to look like. Uh, this was a good one. So we had this like little social media reference, and I'm sure this was 8 years ago. So I'm sure it's a lot more important these days. But like, what hashtags does your library use if you have social media? Um, what is your Facebook address? What are your Twitter usernames? Can't tell you how many times um, I got someplace and found out, like, oh, look, we have 3 different Pinterests because somebody didn't realize we had Pinterest and started another one. Why a library needs Pinterest. But I do like that we had the this visual of the organizational chart. So it was very clear to see, like, nope, copy editors don't get to boss around a designer. Um, we had all of the job descriptions in one place. Um, Again, this I totally didn't love because the job descriptions also got updated in another file, and then if they changed, they had to be updated in here. Um, but was what it was. List of resources. I don't know that, I mean, like, what was another good section? I mean, so there was, and this particular document, so I saved the table of contents in a separate file, so that there was the listing of all of the sections and then what subsections were in the section. You can see we've got uh, the bylaws from the student government here. Um, we've got internal references to other parts of the document. That can be extremely important. It can be more useful if you have like the page number or the section that this is in, like where is training at conferences? Could have done that better. So here we have very general layout of editorial process, uh, how to do news gathering. So this really covered a lot. And, by keeping it online, the students were able to do, searches and just be like, oh, wait, where's police beat? And go right to it and find out what it was that they needed to know. So yeah, don't love the giant blocks of text in that one. Um, Here's an example of a quick reference document um, for chemical handling. So this is one where it's extremely important to be very accurate. One of the things that I think um, would have been good in this document is visuals. What do the chlorine briquettes look like? What does the hydrochloric acid bottle look like? So that, like it's immediately identifiable. It says MSDS binders can be found on each of these chemicals in their respective areas. Could have been helpful to have a picture of the binder as it sat on, I like a lot of times they just sat on pipes sitting in a chem room. So, um, so here's one where having some more visuals would have been really useful. Um, and also, like, this is a huge block of text for something that should be either safety or process. Either this is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or it's a danger, danger, danger. But block of text does not communicate either of those things. Um, here's one of like a map. So map documentation can be very important. So maybe, like you have student employees who need to do like library uh, checks and they have to walk through the library. Telling a brand new student, hey, go through tutoring and then go and then fiction and then the study rooms might be fine, or you might have a student who doesn't know where one of those things is and doesn't want to ask. So having a map that shows like, here, you are going to walk from here to here to here to here. And then at each of those places, this is what you're checking on. So this was a guard map, and you can see like you are allowed to stand from here to here. And this is what you're responsible for. Um, because otherwise it was like, no, I'm just gonna sit over here. Well, nope, because you're responsible for the other side of this wall and you can't see it if you're sitting. Um, so maps can be very useful for new folks, for visual learners, um, because, you know, just telling someone, oh, go walk through the reference section, they might walk all the way around it and totally miss an area that where they should have picked up books from a browsing shelf, and like you just never even know because they don't know the browsing shelf exists and you think they walk past it. So there's some of the uh, ones that I shared previously. We can also take a look at, let me see, we'll go into the whack to click one. And these will look a little more familiar, but so what, nope, those are not mine. So we've got the, let me look up the norm rules one. So here's one that we did that may look really familiar. So the title is long, but it very clearly tells us what it is. And we have the associated resources. We've got headers. We've got actual organization here. Screenshots that are annotated, highlighting, more screenshot. We've got resources. I've highlighted this here because we need more screenshots. Here is, like where we were like, do we need more context? And so we added in more information and the link rather than just the link. That way, if someone's going through this, um, they don't have to get out of this and come back to it. Um, yeah. Okay. In the chat, Lori, how do you build time into a project for creating documentation? So I think that's that's a really great question. And Tracy says, like creating documentation over breaks is one of her tricks. One of the things that I have learned is that if there is a process, so for example, the calendar one, updating the calendar in Alma, it happens once a year. Now, I could go spend, 30 minutes doing it in the sandbox at any old time of the year and create that documentation. However, I know it needs to get done and I know documentation needs to get created. So I just added 30 minutes into the time it took me to do the thing to document it this time. So I think I put it. Okay, I think it's still hidden because I haven't finished it yet. Let me just log in. So I started with what is my scope? And I decided that I was only going to talk about updating the end of term for due date management. I wasn't gonna like get into how due date affects item policies or like whatever, yada yada. This was literally just about updating the calendar. I then had to figure out what who was going to use it. So it's designed for anyone at one of the libraries or for me if I'm doing it like for someone because something's happened. But libraries do it two different ways. So then knowing my audience made me realize that my scope was actually documenting two different processes, which is why it's not live yet, because I haven't documented the other process the other way. But then I just built in, so I knew that I could update, do this update for, I think Leslie was having me do it for Yakima, because she was having problems with it. And I was like, yeah, I could go in and I could do this in like 2 minutes and have it done. But Leslie and I just scheduled a 30-minute meeting, and it took us all of 15 or 20 minutes. And we went through, and since she is actually part of the audience and someone who might need to use this, um, we were able to go through together. And as we did it, we took screenshots, and she was like, oh, can you like highlight this part of that screenshot or this part, or we need to highlight that. Or I always forget this part. And so as we were doing the thing that would normally take 2 minutes, we created the documentation, and I did already kind of have an outline, so I didn't have to write all of this. And by doing screenshots and using the snip tool and just a red line, I mean, like I literally didn't do anything very fancy. I would save the file real quick, upload it to the LibGuides image manager, and then put it right in. So I, rather than like going back uh, and just doing it for no reason and trying to find that time, I just added a little bit of time into when I was doing it. We have a recommendation um, in the chat for Scribe, which I am not familiar with. Ooh, cool. Uh, so free, you use it on the web, you can get a shareable link. Is there any way to export? No, that's
I can talk about this, and yes.
Oh yeah, please, please.
So, hang on, let me get over here.
And if you want to share, like if you have an example, I can stop sharing.
Sure. Yeah, I can do that. Let me, I have 50,000 windows open right now. So let me get into that really quick. Scribe and here, so share. Which one did I do? 3. Okay, can you guys see that?
Nope.
No. Excellent. Shoot. Sure. How about now?
Yep.
You can see the scribe, this one?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Okay. So, let's see, which one do I want to do? Here we go. So as I went through, so I'm training a new employee on how to build a reading list at course reading list citation, to reserves. And so I literally, as I went through each step, it captured it and also tells you what to do. So here's your navigation, fulfillment. You're going to go here, click on fulfillment. You're going to click courses. It auto populates the little bubble, as well as here. Click add course. And you do all of this, the code field, whatever you guys do. Once you finish all of this, let's see, did I go down here? You can add to these as well. So I think I put I added this use drop down. Like the processing department field, every single step, no snipping,
This is
no adding, highlighting, circling. I did this with the free version. I did 3 of these, and with the free version, you only get 10. So this tab doesn't have content. You don't have to worry about it. So you can add more information in there as much as you want. At the end, I love how it does every single one. Where am I? Come on. Congrats, you're all done. When you finish that, you can go to edit. And if you want to change, add a page, remove a page, delete a section, anything like that, you can do all of that. And then you can copy the link, you can share it, send it to whoever you want. It is, honest to goodness, magic. I did this in about, I think this one I said, actually it says, somewhere I think it said I
That's
did this in
4
like 7
minutes.
minutes.
Yeah.
We are currently now looking into getting
The
Pro, correct. With the Pro, and you can go here and it'll tell you the different ones that you can get. That's the free one. I don't want that. Next steps. Yeah. And then you just look at all the plans. I think the plan we're looking at is this one. You have to, it's a minimum of 5 seats at $12 per month per seat. So about $60. And this one, you have additional ways you can export it. You can customize it, add branding, all of that good stuff. And so this is the one that we're looking into getting. It's also good with any web, desktop, or mobile app if you're like out and about. So I have done research and looked at other options, and frankly, this was the most cost-effective for our school. So it looks like I will be using it. My CERC supervisor will eventually be using it. Melinda, our librarian, will probably be using it. And probably our dean's admin assistant will, and then probably our dean as well. So depending on what your needs are for this, you may want to do the professional personal. It's a little bit more per month. And you don't get as much as this. Oh, and I did not see that either, but that's nice. So yeah, that's Scribe. Again, I have looked at different places. I'll go ahead and put the link in here too.
Now, now with the free, you only get 10, and is there a way to save it in any way elsewhere?
So let's see. What did I do? Did I share it? I gotta remember. So what you, yes, I export. Yes, I export. That's what I did. Yep.
And what does it, can you show us what it looks like as a PDF?
Sure.
Oh no, that's a Pro.
Huh?
It said interesting. Because like next to it said Pro, but then you're doing it.
This is just a preview, upgrade to Pro. So yeah. But I swear, oh, you know what I did? No. I was just look at this one. Manage holdings, delete book records efficiently. Oh, I shared it. I think, how did I do this? Not a snippet. Oh, that's what I did. You can share it so that more than one person has access to this page. That makes sense. So if I look
Mhm.
at my team,
Yeah, you can invite other people to look at it.
yeah. So I have the 4 of us on here, so they can look at all of it. Again, I don't know what it would look like if we could export it a different way, maybe.
Yeah, I
Whoops.
wonder what exporting it, because one of the things, like in like translatability is if you have the pro and you make stuff and then you no longer have the pro, what's the ability to keep the
Well, I think
documents, edit
if
the
you have,
document?
yeah, I think if you have the pro and then you don't have the pro, you're still able to, if you just export it as a PDF, then you can save it. So then if you stop getting pro, then you still have what you've already made.
But then you
And,
can't edit the PDF.
but you cannot edit the PDF.
Yeah. It is
Which is
cool
kind of
though.
hard for us because, you always want to be able to edit
It,
training tools like this, and only because there's always upgrades, right?
yeah, because Alma will change
Alma will
as
change.
soon as we sneeze.
True. So,
This
I
is
will
pretty
go
cool.
ahead and put scribe um, yeah, I'll go ahead and put this into the
I
chat so
got
you
it.
have the link. And I'll send you a couple other links as well that I have of other options, other programs that do this, but I just sent them to my supervisor so we could weigh out which ones we like the best. I'm still gonna try and push for Scribe because for us, it was the most cost effective and it's what we needed most. It met our needs. So I'll go ahead and put the other ones in there that I've already researched so y'all don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, that is super cool. I'm excited to play with that.
Oh,
Thank
it's
you for sharing.
magic. And if you
Uh,
guys have other questions, just let me know.
yeah. So we are just about at time, and so I really encourage you all between now and August 6th to like either start a documentation process or think about a piece of documentation that you'd like to work on, and we will really try and spend the time sharing out. We might even do a few little like breakout rooms uh, to work on people's documentation, just collective think tank kind of style. Um, and we'll also talk about some of the pitfalls that can happen when you're trying to do documentation, and we talk about how you can mitigate those or avoid them, what strategies you all might have to share with the rest of the group. Um, so if you would like any like help in the meantime or want to like talk about your idea, please let me know. I will be on vacation for most of the time between now and then. I'm around for the rest of this week, and then I'm back on July 31st. So really just next week is out. But yeah, I'm very excited to see what you all are working on. I do also have the comments from registration And so if we don't have like a ton of examples that you guys bring, I've got that list and we can discuss and share existing documentation on those topics. So it's not homework, but we'll have a really cool, productive session if you bring something to work on next time. So with that, I'm going to stop the recording.